Dust covered everything on Ashara Prime. David Reed brushed another layer off the stone tablet and squinted at the markings beneath. 3 months on this dead world, and they still had barely scratched the surface of what lay buried here. The ruins stretched for miles in every direction, silent monuments to a civilization that had turned to dust 50,000 years ago. Found another inscription cluster. David called out to the rest of the excavation team. His voice echoed across the empty plaza they had been clearing for weeks. Quill floated over, her crystalline body refracting the pale sunlight into rainbow patterns across the ancient stones. She was the expedition's lead researcher, a being whose species had been exploring space when humans still lived in caves. At least that was what she reminded David of whenever he suggested a new theory. "Let me see," Quill said, her voice like wind chimes. She hovered close to the tablet, her internal light pulsing as she analyzed the symbols. Predecessor script, middle period. Probably religious in nature based on the repetition patterns. David had heard that assessment 100 times already. Everything they found was supposedly religious. Temples, shrines, prayer halls. The predecessors had apparently spent all their time worshipping and none of it doing anything practical. He did not buy it, but arguing with Quill was exhausting. "There are names here," David said, tracing the symbols with his gloved finger. "Personal identifiers, not deity references." Quill's light flickered, and what David had learned was her species' equivalent of a dismissive laugh. "You have been out in the sun too long, human. The predecessors did not use individual names the way your people do. They had collective identifiers based on function and hive association." "Then explain this," David said, pointing to a specific sequence of symbols. "This pattern repeats 17 times across this wall alone, always in contexts that suggest individual action. One being doing something, not a group." Quill drifted closer. Her light went still. David knew that meant she was actually paying attention now instead of just humoring him. She studied the symbols for several long minutes while other team members continued their work around the plaza. "Interesting," she finally said. The word came out slowly, carefully. "This is unusual." "Unusual how?" "The phonetic structure." Quill's crystalline fingers traced the air above the symbols, not quite touching them. "If I am reading this correctly, and I need to verify with the linguistic database, but this appears to be a name. A proper name." David felt a small surge of satisfaction. He had been right. "What does it say?" "The pronunciation would be something like David, or perhaps David." Quill rotated to face him, light pulsing rapidly now. "Does your species have names that sound like this?" The satisfaction turned to ice in David's stomach. "That's my name, David." "Coincidence," Quill said immediately. "Phonetic overlap between unrelated languages. It happens. 17 times on one wall? We should continue mapping the site," Quill said, already floating away. "Document everything you find, but do not jump to conclusions." David looked back at the tablet. The symbol sequence that spelled out something very close to his name sat there in stone, carved 50,000 years before humans had left Earth. Before humans had discovered fire, if the dating was correct. He pulled out his scanner and started photographing every angle, every detail. The rest of the day passed in a blur of documentation. David worked mechanically, his mind spinning. By evening, when the team gathered at their camp on the edge of the ruins, he had found his name or something very close to it 43 more times. Different walls, different buildings, always in similar contexts, always suggesting individual action, individual importance. He did not mention it at dinner. The team sat around their portable heaters, eating ration packs and discussing the day's findings. Scale, a reptilian xenobiologist, talked about soil samples. Whisper, a moth-like being whose real name David could not pronounce, reported on atmospheric readings from inside a sealed chamber. Quill said nothing about the names. After the others had retired to their shelters, David stayed up reviewing his scans. He pulled up the translation software and started running analysis on the symbol patterns. The program confirmed what Quill had said about phonetics. The predecessor language used sound-based symbolic representation. Each symbol corresponded to a specific sound, and when strung together they formed words. David isolated every instance where his name appeared. 43 examples. He fed them all into the translation matrix, looking for context. The program worked for 2 hours before spitting out results. The contexts were consistent: leadership, judgment, mediation, peacekeeping. The Name appeared in phrases that translated roughly as David who speaks for both sides, or David who weighs truth, or David who walks between. His hand shook as he pulled up a star map from the temple complex they had found last week. The predecessors had been master astronomers. Their charts showed thousands of star systems, trade routes, political boundaries. David zoomed in on one particular section, the region of space where Earth's sun would be. There was a marker there, a special designation. The translation software identified it as World of the Wardens. And around that marker, in carefully carved symbols, was his name repeated 12 times in a circle. David heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Quill floating in the darkness just outside his tent. "You found it," she said quietly. "The star map." "You knew," David said. "It was not a question, I suspected. The Council has protocols for this situation." Quill's light had dimmed to barely a glow. "There have been other sites, other discoveries. Always suppressed, always classified. Why? Because the predecessors did not vanish, David. They were not destroyed by war or plague or natural disaster. They were abandoned. The beings they called wardens, the peacekeepers who held their empire together for 10,000 years, those beings left. And when they left, everything fell apart within a single generation." David stared at the star map on his screen, at Earth's location, at his name. "The wardens looked like you," Quill said. "They had names like yours. They came from your world, and 50,000 years ago they went home and never came back." The night air felt suddenly very cold. David looked up at the alien sky, at stars that the predecessors had mapped in intricate detail, and wondered what his ancestors had been running from. The Galactic Council's shutdown order arrived 3 days later. David watched from his tent as uniformed enforcers landed in sleek shuttles, their weapons prominently displayed. They moved through the camp with mechanical efficiency, confiscating data pads, sealing equipment, placing restraining fields around the most significant finds. Quill met with the lead enforcer, a towering insectoid whose chitinous armor gleamed in the morning light. David could not hear the conversation, but he saw Quill's light flash in agitation several times before she finally dimmed in submission. The excavation was over. "Pack your personal belongings only," the enforcer announced to the assembled team. "All research materials remain property of the Council. Transport leaves in 2 hours." David had expected this. He had spent the last 3 days copying every file, every scan, every photograph onto an isolated drive that he kept in his jacket. If they searched him, they would find it, but he was betting they would not bother. Humans were new to galactic society, barely worth noticing. The trip back to the orbital station took 6 hours. David spent most of it staring out the viewport at Ashara Prime shrinking below them. Somewhere down there, buried under millennia of dust, lay the truth about humanity's forgotten past, and the Council was making absolutely sure no one would find it. At the station, the team dispersed. Scale and the others headed for transport ships bound for their homeworlds. Quill floated away without saying goodbye, her light subdued. David found himself alone in the transit hub, surrounded by dozens of alien species going about their business, none of them giving him a second glance. "You look lost." The voice came from beside him, soft and rustling like paper in wind. David turned to find Whisper perched on a bench. The moth-like being's wings were folded neatly against her back, their patterns shifting slowly in the station's artificial light. She had been the quietest member of the expedition, always working alone, rarely speaking at team meetings. "Just trying to figure out where I go from here," David said. "You could go home, forget what you found, live a quiet life." Whisper's antennae twitched. "That is what they hope you will do. And if I do not want to forget, then you should visit the Archive of Forgotten Things. Level 712. Ask for Restricted Section 9. Whisper stood, her wings catching the light. Or do not. Either way, we never had this conversation. She walked away before David could respond, disappearing into the crowd of beings moving through the transit hub. David stood there for a moment, then pulled up the station directory on a public terminal. Level 712 was listed as administrative storage. Nothing interesting. Nothing that would draw attention. He took 3 different transit pods to get there, switching at random intervals in case anyone was following. By the time he reached level 712, he was reasonably sure he was alone. The corridor was empty, lit by dim panels that flickered occasionally. Doors lined both sides, all marked with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to him. Section 9 was at the far end. The door was unlocked. Inside, David found rows of data cores stacked on shelves that stretched up toward a ceiling lost in darkness. A single workstation sat in the center of the room, its screen glowing softly. "I wondered if you would come." Whisper emerged from behind one of the shelving units. "Humans are predictable in their curiosity. What is this place?" "Everything the Council wants to forget. Every discovery that contradicts official history. Every piece of evidence that might upset the current order." Whisper moved to the workstation and activated it with a touch of her wing.
"I am the keeper of these forgotten things."
"It is a position no one wants, which makes it perfect for hiding truth." The screen filled with files, thousands of them. David scanned the names. Excavation reports from dozens of worlds, genetic analyses, linguistic studies, all marked with the highest classification levels. "The Council has known for 3 centuries, Whisper said, ever since they first made contact with Earth. They recognized human morphology immediately from predecessor records. They knew what humans were or what they had been." She pulled up a file. Images filled the screen. Predecessor artwork showing tall bipedal figures with proportions identical to humans. The figures wore no armor or weapons, just simple robes. In every image, other beings surrounded them, looking up at them, reaching toward them. "The Wardens," David said quietly. "The predecessors had 27 different words for peace." Whisper continued. "Before the Wardens, they had none. Your ancestors taught them conflict resolution, diplomacy, negotiation, things that humans seem to understand instinctively, but that the rest of us have to learn through painful trial and error." David scrolled through more files. Star maps marking Earth's location with reverent symbols. Medical records showing Warden genetic material. Written accounts describing how the Wardens could understand both sides of any dispute, could find common ground where none seemed to exist, could calm violence with words alone. "Why did they leave?" David asked. "No one knows. The records simply say the Wardens gathered their people and returned to their homeworld. Within 50 years, the predecessor empire collapsed. Civil wars, territorial disputes, genocides, all the things the Wardens had prevented came flooding back." Whisper pulled up another file. This one showed a timeline. The fall of the predecessors, the rise of new civilizations in the ashes, the slow, painful climb back toward interstellar society, and the conspicuous absence of Earth from any of it for the next 49,000 years. When humans finally achieved spaceflight and made contact with the wider galaxy, the Council faced a choice, Whisper said. Acknowledge the truth and risk humans reclaiming their role as Wardens, or suppress the evidence and keep the current power structure intact. They chose suppression. Can you blame them? The species who currently hold power would lose it. The careful balance of the Council would shift. And perhaps worst of all, they would have to admit that they need you, that they have always needed you. Whisper's wings rustled softly. Pride is not unique to humans, David. David sat down at the workstation, his mind reeling. Everything he had found on Ashara Prime was here, multiplied 100 times over. Evidence from across the galaxy, all pointing to the same conclusion. Humanity had not climbed up from nothing. They had fallen from everything. What happens now? He asked. That depends on you. I can seal this room behind you. You can go back to Earth. Tell everyone the Council declared the site archaeologically insignificant. Live your life. Or you can copy these files and decide what to do with the truth. David looked at the screen, at the images of his ancestors walking among alien civilizations, bringing peace where there had been only chaos, at the records showing the collapse that followed when they left, at the careful, deliberate suppression of evidence that had lasted 300 years. He thought about Quill's warning, about the Council's fear, about the responsibility that came with knowledge. Then he pulled out his data drive and started copying everything. This will cause problems, Whisper said. It was not a question. Yes, David agreed. It will. Outside the archive, the station hummed with the business of 1,000 worlds, all of them built on a history that was incomplete. David copied file after file, knowing that once he walked out of this room, everything would change. For humanity, for the galaxy, for the careful lies everyone had agreed to believe. The download finished. David stood drive in hand and looked at Whisper. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Whisper said. You're about to make a lot of very powerful beings very angry. Some of them will try to stop you. Some of them might try to kill you. I know. Good. At least you are not naive. Whisper moved toward the door. For what it matters, I think you are doing the right thing. My people remember the long peace. We remember what it was like when the wardens walked among us. Perhaps it is time the galaxy remembered too. David left the archive with enough evidence to rewrite galactic history. The question now was whether anyone would listen before the council silenced him forever. The academic conference on Bellow Station was supposed to be boring. David had counted on that. Boring meant low security. Boring meant the council would not be paying attention. Boring meant he might actually get to speak before they shut him down. He registered under a fake research topic about sediment analysis techniques. The kind of presentation that would clear a room in minutes. Then he waited, the data drive burning a hole in his pocket, for his scheduled slot on the third day. Bellow Station was neutral territory, administered by a coalition of minor species who were not part of the council's inner circle. That gave David some protection, but not much. If the council wanted to silence him badly enough, neutral territory would not stop them. He spent the first 2 days attending other presentations, trying to blend in. A geologist from Crevet 9 discussed mineral formations. A xenobiologist demonstrated new DNA sequencing techniques. Everything was academic, sterile, safe. No one was challenging the established order. No one was rocking the boat. On the third day, David's turn came. The presentation room was small, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the station's conference wing. Maybe 30 beings sat scattered among the seats, most of them looking half asleep. Perfect. David connected his data pad to the projection system. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He had rehearsed this 100 times. He knew exactly what to say, exactly what to show, exactly how to make his case before security arrived. "Thank you for coming," he began. "My name is David Reed, and I am about to tell you something that will change everything you think you know about galactic history." That got their attention. A few beings sat up straighter. Others exchanged glances. David pulled up the first image, the star map from Ashara Prime, with Earth marked as the world of the Wardens. 50,000 years ago, humans did not live in caves. We walked among the stars as peacekeepers for the greatest empire the galaxy has ever known. The room erupted. Some beings started shouting questions. Others activated recording devices. A Crevet geologist stood up and demanded proof. David smiled and started showing them everything. The inscriptions, the genetic records, the artwork, the timeline of the predecessor collapse. File after file, piece after piece, building an undeniable case. The name patterns that matched human phonetics. The architectural similarities. The medical data showing identical DNA markers. "The Council has known for 3 centuries, David said, his voice carrying over the growing noise. They have actively suppressed this information to maintain the current power structure. But the truth is in the ruins on dozens of worlds. The truth is in their own archives. The truth is that humans are not newcomers to the galaxy. We are coming home." The doors burst open. Station security poured in, along with 3 council enforcers. David had expected this too. He had maybe 2 minutes before they shut down his presentation and arrested him. "One more thing," David shouted over the chaos. He pulled up the final file, the one he had saved for last. A complete dump of everything Whisper had given him, uploading in real time to every data pad in the room and broadcasting on open channels throughout the station. "I am sharing all the evidence. Every file, every record. It is yours now. Share it, study it. Decide for yourselves what it means." The lead enforcer, the same insectoid from Ashara Prime, pointed at David. "You are under arrest for unauthorized distribution of classified materials." "Too late," David said. "It is already out there." The room descended into chaos. Some beings were already forwarding the files to colleagues on other stations. Others were arguing loudly about the implications. A few were trying to leave but found their way blocked by security. David stood calmly as the enforcers approached, knowing he had done what he came to do. Then Scale stood up. The reptilian xenobiologist had been sitting in the back row, so quiet David had not noticed him. "I can verify some of this," Scale said loudly. "My homeworld has ruins, sealed by our government. But my grandfather was part of the original excavation team. He told me stories before he died. Stories about humanoid figures in the ancient artwork. Stories the government said were classified for security reasons. Another being Rose, a avian with bright plumage. My people have legends. Old stories about the time of calm when giants from the sky taught us to speak instead of fight. I thought they were just myths. More voices joined in. A crystalline being from the outer rim, a aquatic species representative, a fungal collective's ambassador, all of them sharing pieces of suppressed history, forgotten stories, classified findings. The evidence David had released was not just confirming his claims. It was triggering a cascade of revelations across dozens of species. The enforcers stopped advancing. They stood uncertainly, clearly receiving conflicting orders through their communication devices. You could arrest one human with controversial data. You could not arrest half the conference attendees representing 40 different species. This is unauthorized disclosure. The lead enforcer tried again, but his voice lacked conviction. Of what? Scale shot back. Our own histories? Information about our own worlds? By what authority does the Council classify the past of sovereign species? The room exploded into argument again. David saw his moment and slipped toward a side exit. The enforcers were too busy trying to restore order to notice him leaving. He made it into the corridor and started running. Behind him, the conference dissolved into chaos. David could hear raised voices, accusations, demands for answers. His data dump was spreading through the station's network like fire. People were talking, sharing, questioning. Exactly what he had hoped for. He made it to a transit pod before anyone came after him. As it carried him away from the conference wing, David pulled up the station's communication feeds. The story was already going viral. News agencies were picking it up. Independent researchers were analyzing the data. Social networks across a dozen species were lighting up with discussion and debate. Then he saw something that made him smile. Quill had published a paper. In the last 30 minutes, she had written and distributed a detailed analysis confirming David's findings from a linguistic perspective. She was using her reputation as the expedition's lead researcher to validate everything he had claimed. Other academics were following suit. The beings whose presentations David had attended over the last 2 days were coming forward with their own suppressed findings. The fungal collective was sharing genetic data. The aquatic species was releasing historical records. It was like David had pulled a cork from a bottle, and now everything was pouring out. His communication device buzzed. A message from Whisper. Well done. The council is in emergency session. Half their members are demanding your arrest. The other half are demanding answers about why this was hidden. It will not be resolved quickly, David typed back. What happens now? Now you go to Earth before they decide which half wins. David changed course, heading for the commercial docks. He could catch a transport to human space within the hour. Once he was back on Earth, the council's authority became significantly more complicated. They could not just arrest him. They would have to go through human government channels, and given what he had just revealed, he doubted Earth's leadership would cooperate. As his pod descended toward the docks, David looked out at the stars visible through the station's viewports. Somewhere out there was Ashara Prime, its ruins still holding secrets. Somewhere were dozens of other worlds with their own buried truths. And somewhere, 50,000 years ago, his ancestors had walked away from all of this. David still did not know why they had left, but he was starting to suspect it had something to do with the burden of being needed, the weight of being essential, the responsibility of being the only ones who could hold everything together. His ancestors had run from that weight. David was running toward it. He supposed that made him either very brave or very stupid. Time would tell which. The transport to Earth departed on schedule. David found a seat near a viewport and watched Bellows Station recede into the distance. Behind him, the galaxy was beginning to remember. Ahead of him, Earth waited, unaware that its children were about to reclaim a legacy 50,000 years old. The question was whether humanity was ready for it, and whether the galaxy was ready for humanity. Rain fell on Cairo as David stepped off the transport shuttle. He had not seen Earth rain in 2 years, and the smell of wet concrete and desert dust hit him like a physical force. Home. He was home, and home was about to get very complicated. His communication device had not stopped buzzing since he entered Earth's atmosphere. Interview requests from every major news network, messages from academic institutions, calls from government officials, and 3 increasingly urgent summons from the United Earth Council demanding his immediate presence in Geneva. David ignored them all and took a taxi to the old city. If the council wanted him, they could find him. But first, he needed to do something he should have done before leaving Earth 2 years ago. The museum sat on a quiet street near the river, small, privately funded, dedicated to preserving Egyptian antiquities that the larger institutions overlooked. David had worked here before joining the Ashara Prime expedition. The director, an elderly woman named Amira, had been his mentor and friend. She was waiting for him in her office, tea already prepared. "I saw your presentation," she said as David sat down. "The whole world saw it. You have caused quite a stir, I know. I am sorry I could not warn you." "Sorry?" Amira smiled. "David, you have just proven that everything I have been saying for 40 years is true. Those alignments in the old structures, the mathematical constants that seem too advanced, the gaps in our archaeological record. I always knew something was missing from our history." She pulled out a folder, old-fashioned paper files that she had kept locked away for decades. "I want to show you something. After humanity made first contact and joined the galactic community, the Council sent representatives to Earth. They visited major archaeological sites, officially to learn about our culture. But I was at several digs when they came and I noticed something odd." Amira spread photographs across her desk. "They were looking for something specific, and whenever they found it, they would confiscate the artifacts, claiming they needed to be studied at proper galactic facilities. But the artifacts never came back." David looked at the photos. Tablets with unusual markings, statues with strange proportions, building foundations that used techniques that should not have existed at those time periods. "I made copies before they took them," Amira continued. "Secret copies because something felt wrong about the whole thing. Look at these symbols," she pointed to a tablet fragment showing carved characters. David's breath caught. The symbols were nearly identical to predecessor script. Not quite the same, but clearly related, like a parent language and its descendant. "This is from a sealed chamber under the Sphinx," Amira said. "Carbon dated to 51,000 years ago." The council representatives saw it and immediately classified it under galactic security protocols. They said it was contaminated by off-world materials and needed to be removed for analysis. "They were hiding it," David said, "just like everything else." "Yes, but they could not hide everything. Egypt is old, David, very old, and we dig deep." She pulled out more files. "There are 3 other sites like this, all sealed by government order after council inspection, all dated to roughly the same period, all containing artifacts that do not match our accepted timeline of human development." David felt the pieces clicking together. The wardens did not just visit the predecessors. They came from somewhere. They had to have a home base, a place where their civilization developed. "Earth," Amira said simply. "We are not descended from the wardens, David. We are the wardens. Or at least we were. 50,000 years ago, our ancestors had technology, society, culture. Then something happened. They gave it all up and reset to zero. But why? That is the question, isn't it?" Amira poured more tea. "I have thought about this for a long time. What could make an advanced civilization voluntarily give up everything they had built? What would be worth starting over from scratch?" Before David could answer, his device buzzed again. This time he looked at it. The message was from the United Earth Council, marked urgent and official. "David Reed, you are hereby required to appear before the full council in Geneva within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in arrest and extradition to Galactic Council custody." "They are scared," Amira said, reading over his shoulder. "The Galactic Council is pressuring Earth's government to control you. But our leaders are in a difficult position. If they hand you over, they look like puppets. If they protect you, they risk conflict with the galaxy." "I need to see those sealed sites," David said. "If there is evidence on Earth that confirms everything I found out there, then this becomes undeniable. The government will never allow it. Those sites are under military guard now. Then I will have to be persuasive." David stood and walked to the window. Outside, Cairo continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that the ground under their feet held secrets that could rewrite human history. His device buzzed again. More messages, more demands, more people wanting him to explain or recant or elaborate. Then one message caught his eye. From Scale, the reptilian xenobiologist. "David, there are riots on 6 council worlds. Species demanding access to their suppressed histories. The council is fracturing. Some members are supporting you. Others want you disappeared. Be careful." Another message appeared, this one from an unknown sender. "Dr. Reed, this is Council Member Drift. I served on the council for 200 years. I voted to suppress the Warden evidence when humans first made contact. I was wrong. I have information you need. Meet me at the old observatory outside Geneva. Come alone. Trust no one in official channels. David showed the messages to Amira. She frowned. It could be a trap, probably is. But I need allies on the council if this is going to work, and I need to know what they are really afraid of. Then I am coming with you. Amira, you don't have to. I have waited 40 years for someone to take this seriously. She interrupted. I am not missing the conclusion. Besides, you need someone who knows Earth's history as well as you know galactic history. David could not argue with that. They left the museum through a back exit, avoiding the journalists who had started gathering out front. Cairo's streets were busy enough to provide cover as they made their way to the spaceport. The flight to Geneva took 3 hours. David spent it reviewing everything he knew about Council Member Drift. An avian species over 300 years old, senior member of the Council with significant influence. If Drift was really offering help, it could change everything. If it was a trap, David was walking right into it. The observatory sat on a mountain overlooking the city. Ancient by human standards, it had been built in the early space age and preserved as a historical site. David and Amira arrived after dark, the building silhouetted against the stars. Drift waited inside, perched on what had once been a telescope mount. In the dim light, his plumage looked gray and tired. He studied David and Amira as they approached. Dr. Reed. And you brought company. This is Dr. Amira Hassan. She has been investigating this longer than I have. Then she has my respect. Drift shifted his wings. I suppose you want to know why I asked you here? That would be helpful. I want to tell you why the Wardens left, Drift said. The real reason? The one that even the suppressed records do not fully explain. Because if you are going to push humanity back into their old role, you need to understand what you are asking your people to take on. He pulled up a holographic display. Images filled the air. The predecessor empire at its height, thousands of worlds, billions of beings, all living in unprecedented peace and prosperity. The Wardens did not just mediate disputes, Drift said. They held everything together. Every conflict, every disagreement, every potential war, it all came to them. They were the only ones everyone trusted. The only ones who could see all sides clearly. The only ones who could make decisions that everyone accepted. More images. The Wardens meeting with leaders, negotiating treaties, resolving conflicts. In every image, they looked tired. Worn down, burdened. It broke them, Drift said quietly. The weight of being essential. The knowledge that if they failed, millions would die. They served for 10,000 years, and every generation bore that burden. Until finally, they could not bear it anymore. David stared at the images, at his ancestors serving, sacrificing, slowly crumbling under the weight of galactic need. They did not run away, Drift continued. They made a choice. They decided their children deserved a chance to be something other than necessary, so they went home, destroyed their technology, and started over. They chose to forget. And the predecessors fell apart without them, Amira said. Yes, because we never learned to stand on our own. We relied on the Wardens for everything. When they left, we reverted to our old ways. Wars, genocides, collapse. It took us 45,000 years to crawl back to civilization. And when we finally did, when we formed the Galactic Council, we swore we would never be that dependent again. Drift looked directly at David. That is why we hid the truth. Not just to maintain power, but because we were afraid. Afraid that if humans remembered what they were, they would see what we still are. Species that never really learned how to resolve our own conflicts. Species that might need you again. And we could not face that dependency. The observatory fell silent except for the distant hum of the city below. David thought about his name carved in 50,000-year-old stone. About ancestors who had shouldered an impossible burden. About the choice they had made to let their children be free of it. What if we choose differently? David asked. What if humanity decides we want to serve, but on our own terms this time? Then everything changes, Drift said. For all of us. The sealed chamber beneath the pyramids had not been opened in 60 years. David stood before the military checkpoint at dawn, surrounded by reporters, government officials, and curious onlookers who had somehow learned where he was going. The whole world was watching. The whole galaxy was watching. This is highly irregular, the colonel in charge said for the third time. He was a tired-looking man with gray in his hair and worry lines around his eyes. These sites are classified under international treaty. I cannot just let you walk in. Cannot or will not? Amira asked sharply. She had dealt with bureaucrats for decades and had no patience for them anymore. Both, the colonel admitted. The treaty was signed when Earth joined the Galactic Council. These sites were sealed as part of the agreement. Opening them requires council approval. The council is currently in chaos, David said. Half their members want these sites opened. The other half wants me arrested. While they argue, we could actually find some answers. The colonel looked uncertain. David could see him calculating the political ramifications. Behind them, the media drones buzzed, recording everything. This was already a public spectacle. The question was whether the colonel would be remembered as the man who helped uncover the truth or the man who stood in its way. I need authorization from Geneva, the colonel said, finally. Then call them. The colonel stepped away to make the call. David waited, watching the sun rise over the pyramids. These ancient structures had stood for thousands of years, but if Amira was right, they were practically modern compared to what lay beneath them. The colonel returned, looking even more worried. Geneva says no. Direct order from the United Earth Council. These sites remain sealed pending Galactic Council review. Of course they do, Amira muttered. Because the Galactic Council wants to keep hiding the truth. One of the reporters pushed forward. Colonel, is it true that the Council confiscated artifacts from this site? Artifacts proving human civilization is older than officially stated. The colonel refused to answer, but his expression said everything. The reporter turned to their camera. We are live outside a sealed archaeological site where Dr. David Reed is being denied access to potential evidence about humanity's true history. The United Earth Council has sided with galactic authorities over one of their own citizens, seeking answers about our past. More reporters picked up the story. Within minutes, it was spreading across Earth's networks. David watched it happen, saw the narrative forming. Earth's government protecting alien interests over human knowledge. The establishment trying to hide the truth. It was exactly the kind of story that would make people angry. His device buzzed. Messages from around the world. Protests forming at government buildings. Citizens demanding answers. Other sealed sites being identified by amateur researchers. The whole thing was becoming a movement faster than anyone could control it. Then a new message arrived. From Drift. The council has voted. You are to be arrested and extradited immediately. Earth's government has agreed in exchange for trade concessions. You have perhaps 2 hours before they send enforcers for you. David looked at the military checkpoint. At the colonel, who was receiving new orders through his earpiece. At Amira standing beside him. At the media recording everything. We need to move, David said quietly. Where? Amira asked. They will be looking everywhere. Not everywhere. Remember what you said about how deep we dig in Egypt? How the council could not hide everything? David smiled. I think it is time we did some digging of our own. Before the colonel could stop them, David and Amira pushed past the checkpoint and ran toward the pyramids. Shouts followed them. Security personnel gave chase. But David had studied the site maps Amira had shown him. He knew where he was going. The entrance was supposed to be sealed. But Amira had connections with the local archaeological community, and those connections had made sure one particular maintenance shaft remained accessible. They dropped down into darkness, leaving the chaos above behind. Emergency lights flickered on as they descended. The shaft led down, far deeper than the official tours ever went. Down past the burial chambers everyone knew about. Down past the hidden passages discovered in the 20th century. Down to levels that were not on any public map. This was found in 1962, Amira said as they climbed down metal ladder rungs. An international team accidentally broke through while doing ground-penetrating radar studies. What they found scared them so badly they sealed it immediately and never published their findings. But I knew one of the researchers. Before he died, he told me how to find it. The shaft ended at a wall of stone that looked ancient beyond measure. Amira pressed specific points on the surface in a sequence she had memorized. Something clicked. The wall slid aside, revealing a corridor beyond. The corridor was not Egyptian. The architecture was wrong, the proportions off. The walls were smooth and seamless in a way that should not have been possible with ancient technology. David recognized the style immediately. He had seen it on Ashara Prime. Predecessor construction techniques, he said. But this is Earth. This was built before the predecessors even evolved. Not predecessor, Amira corrected. Warden, this is what your ancestors built. This is what they left behind before they chose to forget. They walked deeper into the complex. The passage opened into a chamber that took David's breath away. It was vast, stretching hundreds of meters in every direction. The walls were covered in inscriptions, but these were different from anything found on Ashara Prime. These were older, more fundamental. Teaching texts, David realized. Instructions on how to build, how to govern, how to mediate. In the center of the chamber stood a pillar of crystal. As David approached, it began to glow. A holographic interface activated, responding to his presence. It recognizes you, Amira said. It recognizes human DNA. David touched the pillar. Images flooded his mind. Not video or audio, but pure information downloading directly into his consciousness. He saw Earth as it had been 50,000 years ago. Not primitive, but thriving. Cities that reached toward the sky, ships that traveled to other stars, a civilization that had mastered technology and turned it toward understanding consciousness itself. He saw the wardens at their height, humans who had learned to perceive conflicts from multiple perspectives simultaneously, who could hold contradictory viewpoints in their minds and find the truth between them, who had become, through long practice and genetic adaptation, the perfect mediators. He saw them spread across the galaxy, helping younger species avoid the mistakes humans had made, preventing wars before they started, building peace that lasted millennia. And he saw the cost. The exhaustion, the loneliness of being the only ones who could do what they did, the guilt of knowing that if they stopped, others would suffer. The weight of being needed pressing down on generation after generation until they could barely stand. Finally, he saw the choice, a gathering of all wardens across all worlds. A decision reached after years of debate. They would go home. They would destroy their technology. They would engineer their own regression, scattering themselves across Earth in small, isolated groups. They would give their descendants the gift of ignorance, the freedom to be something other than necessary. But they left a backup, hidden chambers on Earth containing their knowledge, waiting for the day when humanity might be ready to choose for themselves whether to reclaim their legacy. The images faded. David found himself on his knees, tears streaming down his face. Amira knelt beside him, her own face wet. "You saw it too," David said. "Yes. The pillar shares its knowledge with anyone who touches it. That is why they sealed this place. Can you imagine what would have happened if this was found during the Cold War? If one nation discovered humanity's true potential?" David stood on shaky legs. Around them, the chamber walls glowed with knowledge accumulated over 10,000 years of serving as galactic peacekeepers. Everything from basic conflict resolution to advanced techniques for facilitating communication between species with completely different psychology. "There are 12 chambers like this," Amira said, "hidden around the world, each one containing different aspects of warden knowledge. Together, they are a complete education in everything humanity once knew, everything we chose to forget." Above them, David heard sounds of pursuit. The military had found the shaft. They had minutes at most. "We need to record this," David said. "We need to show people what is down here." "Already done." Amira held up her device. "Streaming live to every network that will carry it. The world is seeing what we are seeing, and Dr. Reed, half of Earth's population is watching right now." David looked up at the ceiling, at the tons of stone between them and the surface. Somewhere up there, the Galactic Council was trying to suppress the truth. Earth's government was trying to maintain control. Enforcers were coming to arrest him. But down here in a chamber built by his ancestors 50,000 years ago, the truth was already free. It was streaming across Earth's networks, spreading through human civilization, downloading into millions of minds. The knowledge the wardens had left behind, the choice they had made, the burden they had carried and ultimately put down. "What do we do now?" Amira asked. David looked at the glowing pillar, at the walls covered in instructions for how to be what humanity once was, at the legacy waiting to be reclaimed or rejected. "Now we give humanity a choice," he said. "The same choice our ancestors made. We show them what we were, what we could be again, and let them decide if it is worth it." The sounds of pursuit grew closer. David did not run. He stood in the chamber built by humans who had served the galaxy until it broke them. He waited to see what humans who had been free would choose to become. The answer would determine not just Earth's future, but the galaxy's as well. 6 months later, David stood in the restored temple on Ashara Prime. The ruins had been opened to researchers from every species in the galaxy. What had once been a classified site was now a living museum, a place where the past and future met. The Galactic Council had nearly collapsed in the aftermath of his discoveries. 3 species had withdrawn entirely, angry at centuries of suppression. Others had demanded investigations into what else had been hidden. The power structure that had existed for thousands of years was fragmenting, but from that fragmentation came something new. A coalition of species who believed in transparency, who wanted to learn from the past rather than bury it, who were willing to admit they did not have all the answers. David walked through the temple, running his hand along inscriptions that spelled his name in 50,000-year-old script. Tourists from a dozen different worlds took pictures and asked questions. Human volunteers served as guides, explaining what the wardens had been, what they had done. Still strange seeing your name everywhere? Whisper appeared beside him, her wings catching the afternoon light. I am getting used to it, mostly. Earth has made its decision then? David nodded. Last month. Referendum passed with 73% approval. Humanity will re-establish the Warden program, but with changes. What kind of changes? We are not doing it alone. That was the mistake last time. My ancestors thought they had to carry the burden themselves, had to be the only ones who could mediate. This time we are building something collaborative. He pulled up a holographic display. Images of a new institution forming on neutral ground between Earth and the Council core worlds. The Institute for Interspecies Understanding. Humans will teach what we remember and relearn from the ancient chambers, but we will also train members from every species who wants to participate. The goal is not to make humans essential again. The goal is to give everyone the tools to resolve their own conflicts. Whisper studied the plans. Some species will resist. They do not trust that humans can teach this without seeking power. I know. That is why we are starting small. Pilot programs with species who volunteered, proving the concept works before expanding. David paused. And we are being transparent about the costs. The mental strain, the emotional toll, the way this work can wear you down. We are not hiding what our ancestors ran from. Will it be enough? I do not know. But it is better than the alternatives. Better than humans trying to be wardens alone. Better than the galaxy stumbling through conflicts without any real tools to resolve them. David looked around at the temple, at the history preserved in stone. My ancestors made their choice. They decided their children deserved freedom more than the galaxy needed guardians. I think they were right. But now we get to make our own choice. Footsteps echoed across the plaza. Scale approached, carrying a data pad. The first class is ready. 27 students from 14 different species. They are waiting at the Institute. Already? David checked the time. I thought we had another week. They are eager to start. Can you blame them? Half of them came from worlds that experienced major conflicts in the last decade. They want to learn how to prevent the next one. David looked at Whisper. Want to see where this goes? I have been following your work for 6 months. I am not stopping now. They left Ashara Prime on a transport filled with archaeological equipment being moved to other sites. The galaxy was opening up its past, and every day brought new discoveries. Evidence of the wardens on dozens of worlds. Records of the long peace. Proof that cooperation was possible when the right conditions existed. The Institute for Interspecies Understanding occupied a space station built specifically for this purpose. Human predecessor and modern architecture blended together, a physical representation of past and future combining. The first class waited in a circular chamber designed for discussion and debate. 27 beings from 14 species, all of them here because they believed conflict resolution could be learned. Could be taught, could be something more than just a human gift. David stood before them, feeling the weight of responsibility his ancestors had once carried. But this time it was different. This time he was not alone. Welcome, he began. You are here because you want to learn how to bridge differences, how to understand perspectives that seem completely alien, how to find common ground when everything suggests there is none. These are skills my ancestors developed over thousands of years. Skills they tried to keep to themselves, and it nearly destroyed them. He pulled up holographic images, the wardens at work, the techniques they had used, the principles they had discovered. We are not going to make that mistake again. Everything we learn, everything we remember from the ancient chambers we will share, not because humans are generous, but because the work is too important and too difficult for any one species to carry alone. A student raised a tentacle, an aquatic being whose species had been in a territorial dispute for generations. But the records say humans are naturally gifted at this, that you can see multiple perspectives instinctively. How can you teach what comes naturally? You are right that humans developed certain cognitive advantages, David admitted. 50,000 years of selecting for mediation skills left genetic marks. But that does not mean others cannot learn. My ancestors did not start out as perfect mediators. They developed those skills through practice, training, and necessity. What took them millennia we can teach in years. And the cost? Another student, a crystalline being like Quill. The records speak of exhaustion, of the burden breaking your ancestors. How do we avoid that? By not making this a burden, David said. By building systems where mediators can rest, can share the load, can step back when needed. By creating a culture where asking for help is not weakness. By accepting that we will not solve every conflict, and that failure does not mean we should stop trying. The class continued for hours. David taught basic techniques, had the students practice with each other, showed them examples from both ancient warden methods and modern human approaches. Whisper contributed insights from her people's oral histories. Scale shared reptilian perspectives on conflict that none of the others had considered. It was messy. It was difficult. Several times, students clashed over fundamental disagreements about how conflict should be approached. But they worked through it, using the very tools David was teaching them. As the session ended, a young human student approached. She could not have been more than 20, fresh from university with idealism still bright in her eyes. Dr. Reed, do you think this will work? Can we really teach the galaxy to resolve conflicts peacefully? David thought about his ancestors, about the weight they had carried, about the choice they had made to walk away, about the 50,000 years of silence that had followed. I think we can try, he said, and I think trying is better than the alternative. That evening, David returned to his quarters on the station. His walls were covered with images from Ashara Prime, from the chamber beneath the pyramids, from a dozen other sites around the galaxy. Evidence of what humanity had been. But his desk held something more important. Reports from the first meditation cases handled by Institute graduates. Small disputes, nothing galaxy-shaking. A trade disagreement between neighboring systems. A cultural misunderstanding that threatened diplomatic relations. A resource conflict that might have escalated to violence. All resolved peacefully, not by humans alone, but by mixed teams using techniques old and new, proving that what the wardens had known could be learned, could be shared, could become something the whole galaxy owned. David composed a message to Amira back on Earth. She was coordinating the opening of the other hidden chambers, making sure the knowledge was preserved and distributed properly. The work of a lifetime, she called it. The culmination of 40 years searching for truth. His communication device chimed. A message from Drift, the old avian counselor who had helped David understand why the wardens left, who had pushed the council toward acceptance rather than suppression. I wanted you to know, the message read. The council formally voted today to support the Institute. Full funding, full access to archives, full cooperation from member species. It was not unanimous. Some still fear what humans might become, but most recognize that we need this, that we have always needed it. David read the message twice. He thought about standing in that observatory 6 months ago, learning why his ancestors had run, about the burden they could not bear, about the galaxy that had fallen apart without them. Then he looked at the reports on his desk, at the conflicts being resolved, at the students learning, at the future being built not on human exceptionalism, but on shared knowledge and shared responsibility. His ancestors had served until they broke. Then they had chosen freedom for their descendants. Now those descendants were choosing to serve again, but differently, not as the only ones who could. As the ones who taught others how, it was not the same path. It was not the burden the wardens had carried. It was something new, something that acknowledged both the importance of the work and the human cost of doing it alone. David pulled up the image that had started everything, the star map from Ashara Prime with Earth marked as the world of the wardens, his name circling it like a promise or a prophecy. He had spent months trying to figure out what it meant, why the predecessors had carved his name into their temples, Why the phonetics had matched so perfectly. Now he understood. It was not about him specifically. It was about what the name represented. David who judges fairly. David who speaks for both sides. Not a person, but a role. A tradition. A promise that even if the wardens left, even if they forgot, even if 50,000 years passed, eventually, someone would remember, someone would return, someone would carry the name forward. His ancestors had walked away. David had walked back. Not to reclaim an empire, not to rule from above, but to share what had been learned at such cost. To turn a burden into a gift. To transform necessary into collaborative. He composed one final message, addressed to every graduate of the Institute program. Every being who had chosen to learn the Warden ways. Every species member who had decided that peace was worth working for. Our ancestors tried to do this alone, he wrote. And it broke them. We will not make that mistake. We succeed together or not at all. The galaxy does not need saviors. It needs partners. People willing to stand between conflicts and say there is another way. People willing to listen when listening is hard. People willing to find ground that everyone can stand on. He paused, then added a line from the inscription he had commissioned for the restored temple on Ashara Prime. The words now carved in stone alongside the ancient names. They returned not to rule, but to remember why they served. David sent the message and looked out his viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was still full of conflicts, still full of misunderstandings and disputes and potential violence, but now it was also full of people learning how to bridge those gaps, full of beings who believed peace was possible. The Wardens had left. The Wardens had returned. But this time they were not alone. This time the whole galaxy would learn to be Wardens together, and that, David thought, would be a worthy legacy for a name carved in 50,000-year-old stone.